everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where we talk about things that matter. And we talk with people who matter, which is anybody, I think, who wants to engage in these kinds of dialogues. And also, it's you. It's you who are listening or observing or watching or participating in whatever way you are. We all matter. And what's interesting is I've called this podcast Circle Up and Get Real for the 6 seasons we've been here. And the subhead or the subtitle that just came to me one time in a conversation was talking with people who matter, about talking about things that matter with people who matter. And one of the books I'm reading right now that I'm just really engaged with is Bob Chapman's book, Everybody Matters. And so I'm aware of the synchronicity of that and of a lot of other things that seem to be kind of random that keep showing up. So today I wanted to talk about some of those things. And if you live in the Fargo-Moorhead area, you know that today's a snow day. It's very, very windy outside right now. We don't have snow yet. I'm looking out my window. I think it's coming though. So we have a blizzard day here. So I went out to the mailbox to mail something and wow, it's windy. Anyway, that's the context for today. And I just wanted to share some things that I'm studying and becoming aware of around the topic of leadership. If you know me at all, you probably know some of the things I'm going to share today. If you don't, well, and even if you do, it's just a reminder. Chris, Angel, and I are working on a couple of projects, one of which is the Enlightened Leadership Lab on Mondays, which is a virtual 1 hour opportunity for people to be in a lab setting with each other to practice the skill, I guess we could call it the skill, of emergent conversation. And in that 1 hour each week, we have a topic, but we don't have an agenda. So the topic will change, and we might have a series in the topic. And what we're witnessing and experiencing in that space is the best of all of us that can come together when we feel safe to explore some what could be considered random topics, but really have to do with being a leader of your own life. Whether you have a title or a position, it's who you choose to be, which then will dictate how you do what you do. And that's what we're exploring. I think we're probably in year two of the Enlightened Leadership Lab. And the people who are there have really gotten to know each other, even virtually, very well. And they support each other in their thought processes, and we have the opportunity to watch some of those thought processes go with somebody who will say something and then somebody else will jump in and say something. And what we're witnessing live is the way people listen, the way people have the opportunity to formulate their thoughts in a safe space where they're not going to be jumped on for having an alternative point of view or because a thought isn't fully baked yet. This is the lab, and in the lab you have the opportunity to experiment with some of these things. And the way we've defined leadership in the lab is people who are willing to go first toward an as yet maybe, like I said, not fully baked destination. We're going in a direction. And along that way, when we go in the direction, if we're in a space that feels safe to explore, we'll learn things we didn't have in mind before we set out. So this goes back kind of to the book Good to Great that I read in 2000 and just devoured it. I love that book so much. When Jim Collins talks about first who, then what. And he says in the book, you have to get all the people on the bus and then you'll figure out what seats they go in. And I tell you, this was a hard concept for me to figure out at the beginning, back in 2000, when I thought, why would I get on a bus if I didn't know where it was going? And the concept eluded me for quite a while until it clicked one day when I went, oh, the destination isn't as important as who you're going with. Oh, so if we get the right people on the bus, then together we can determine the actual destination or the end point, if we want to look at it that way. And that concept, when it clicked, really showed me what I'm starting to understand is the distinction between, I'll call it enlightened leadership, or maybe we could call it conscious leadership. I've been using that term a lot because of some of the things I've studied. I am a learner. It's my number one on my Strengths Finder. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that these, when I did it again in 2021, these are my top 5 strengths: learner, strategic, achiever, activator, and relator. And in the top 10 is also maximizer and ideation. So I know myself well enough to embrace those strengths. And learner is number 1. So it's no surprise that I will continuously read and study and add to what I know about a subject or a topic, such that if I'm having a conversation or a dialogue, I feel somewhat educated isn't the right word, but I'm not just always spewing things. Although what's really cool about practicing emergent thought, or what I might call the art of thought, as opposed to the act of thinking, is once you get good at discernment, you can more easily trust the thoughts that come to you. At least that's been my experience. So today I just wanted to share some things I'm pondering about leadership. And I've been pretty quiet about politics, at least specific politics, because I'm not all that concerned about the politics of the world. I believe, maybe I should be, but I believe there are people in those positions that are smart enough to know the politics of things, the Republican and Democrat and Independent and whatever the other parties are. I shouldn't say I'm not interested. I guess I thought I knew what being a conservative and being a progressive meant. I'm really kind of confused about what that actually means these days. So I don't understand particularly why people choose a certain party. I thought that conservatives chose a party because they wanted less government and they wanted to be able to do the things they wanted to do. They didn't want the federal government in their business, and they were going to leave a lot of this to the state. But these days it seems like it's just the opposite. It feels like people who say they're Republicans want more government and want more oversight. And so I'm confused by that. I don't understand it, so I don't really get involved in that very much. I thought progressives wanted progress, and it seems that on far reaches of anything, we're more fighting than we are standing. And there's a distinction between fighting for something or fighting, I guess, fighting in general, because we end up spending more time fighting against, even if we say fighting for, because I think the word fight gives a different energy. So we don't stand for what we truly believe in as much as we could, in my opinion. By the way, this is my opinion, and you're welcome to disagree, which I would love, because at least then I can learn. And if people would healthily, I don't even know if that's a word, be in healthy dialogue about things, I love learning. That's the way I can learn best. And if we don't do that, then the people who have the microphones and the people who have the podcasts and the people who are in front of the cameras will say what they believe, and everybody listens because they have the microphone. So the loudest voices are the ones that get heard, not because they're right or because they're accurate, two different things, right and accurate, but because they're just louder. And so when I look at politics in, general, I guess, politics as a realm, I tend to look at where people spend the most time in their lives, and they spend the most time and most energy in business, their work, the work they do, probably in their education at some point. There's a realm of education where people can spend a lot of time and energy and money. We see this, business and education, as two areas where we think they're very important, and they are. The other two I think of are spiritual endeavors, churches, synagogues, mosques, wherever we spend our time connecting to something greater. And then the other one would be government. Government where, I don't even need to get into that, but what I kind of thought the government was there for at the beginning of 249 years ago. So in those 4 buckets, I'll call them, business, spiritual opportunities, education, and government, there's a way of being. There's a way we can be in those areas, and we can be right, or we can be open, or we can be frustrated, or we can be tired. We can be a lot of ways. And so when I look at those 4 areas and I kind of put over those 4 areas this concept of leadership, which is distinct from management, and again, that's a whole other conversation that I've come to over the years of studying this. When we think about leadership, people who are leading humans, I guess that's a distinction I'd like to make in this conversation. A leadership position would be focused on the humans, and a management position would be focused on the systems. So if we can just look at it like that, for the purposes of this conversation, a leadership role can be a management position. It's just that in that management position, in addition to being concerned about the processes, you're also interested, I guess, and committed to the humans. So I look at leadership as something that doesn't require a title, doesn't require that you've been at a position a certain amount of time. You can act as a leader, you can be a leader if you care about humans. And your activities and actions will prove what you say. Because if you say you care about humans and then you don't act as if you care about humans, your actions will speak louder than your words. So I'm really interested in the actions of a leader in the context I just gave it. So in that realm, with that setup, I've been reading and studying 2 books in particular. Again, I study books all the time, but 2 in particular right now currently. And one is Falling Upward, A Spirituality for the Two Halves of Life by Richard Rohr. And I've talked about this here before. I've studied it in 2 different groups, my Saturday Mastermind group, and then also the Enlightened Leadership Lab. We used it as jumping off points for conversation. So I've gotten quite deep into that book. I really, really love that. And then the other one I'm currently reading, I'm not done with it yet. I'm about a little more than halfway through it. But that one's called Everybody Matters, The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family. I'm reading the expanded 10th anniversary edition. This is by Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia. And Bob Chapman he earns his right to talk about leadership because for 40 years he's been working inside mostly factory settings where he is building people. in a crude way I could say that. They build stuff, machines, paper, all that kind of stuff, but they build people basically. They help humans connect with their humanity. And so those 2 books that I've been reading are really, they have a lot of things in common when we look at things like leadership, irrespective of the place where you apply leadership principles. So again, going back to the 4 areas I talked about earlier: business, spirituality, government, and education, those 4 areas. If we could apply leadership characteristics and leadership concepts in those 4 areas, I think we would see things a little bit more clearly. And so I just want to talk about one passage in this book that I found really fascinating. And again, not political. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about politics in this conversation. I'm talking about leadership. 2 different things. I have gotten into trouble in organizations because I was talking about leadership and they heard me talking about politics. And I got chastised. I left an organization because I couldn't have a conversation about leadership in a political setting because people mixed it together. I'm not talking about politics. I'm not talking about Republicans and Democrats and independents and whoever. I'm not talking about that in this context. I'm talking about leadership, okay? Make that very clear. So there's a passage in this book that I found fascinating. The premise of the book is that in the first half of our lives, we're working on things. And again, this is my interpretation, not what the book says. But I can actually read you what the book says if you want to hear it from the words of the author. As we journey through the first half of life, we often think that it will end when we have achieved our goals or climbed as high as we can. With this cultural assumption in our heads, we arrive at life's second half and believe there is nowhere to go but down. falling upward challenges us to rethink this perspective, shining light on the idea that the end of our first path is not an ending, but a new beginning. So at the first half, and by the way, this is not a chronological first half, second half. This is an understanding, the way I understood the book when I read it. He says, as we transition into the second half of life, we are confronted by our challenges, mistakes, losses, and other forms of suffering. Little do most of us realize that these sufferings are in fact enormous gifts, opportunities to step outside our comfort zones and broaden our spiritual horizons. So first half, second half. Striving, driving, trying, hustling, grinding in the first half, because that's what we think we have to do. Climbing the ladder, doing the things. And then at some point something shifts and we go, whoa, oh, there's another way to think of this. Oh, what if I had gotten this sooner? That's what I've been thinking as I've been reading this. And it's been really interesting to me to see it from that perspective. I wish I would have gotten this sooner. You know, it is what it is. We're in the space we are. So in the book, he this part that I flagged says, those who are not true elders or leaders will just affirm people at their own immature level. And of course, immature people will love them and elect them for being equally immature. You can fill in the names here with your own political disaster story. But just remember, there's a symbiosis between immature groups and immature leaders. And it's hard for me not to speak out about the leadership of the political system. I'm talking about leadership, not politics. Please hear me when I say that. The leadership characteristics of the people and the person in power are really telling right now. And if you go back to what Richard Rohr says in this book about the first half of life and being adolescent in our understanding of things, of course we will attract other adolescent behavior. And to me, that's just so obvious when I look from a different perspective. We are getting exactly what we elected, because the majority of people who voted for what we have. And unless we shift the way we're looking at things and we shift into a different way of looking at leadership, I don't know how it's going to change. The divide seems to be getting wider and wider because people are doubling down on being right. See, I told you so is kind of the attitude that we're seeing. And I'm just saying this is what I'm observing. So contrast that, Richard Rohr, immature leadership, adolescent awareness, with Bob Chapman. And Bob Chapman, CEO of Barry Waymiller, lot to say about him. I've been studying him now since I first heard about him about 2 months ago, with Simon Sinek's interview on his podcast, A Bit of Optimism. This book is so much what I've known from the beginning of my career. I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't know that there was a distinction. I had this idealism coming out of college and believing that the world could be an amazing place, and then I continued to get my hopes dashed, and I kept bouncing back and believing it could be different, and couldn't really find a community to support me in my conversations about this until I started reading Fast Company magazine and created the Company of Friends, which was part of that. That it's a global probably magazine. It's still around. I just haven't read it lately, but man, that was early parts of before social media, and we would get together in Fargo with our chapter of Fast Company of Friends, and we would talk about the articles in the magazine, and we just believed there was a better way to do things. And I'll never forget some of those conversations. We had a conversation about leadership many times. We had many conversations about that. Communication, all the things that make the living of our lives better and broader. And so I've been on this path for a long time, but I've just never found such a clear example of what I believe is possible. And I think back to all the random circumstances that brought me right here today. And I talked about this on I think last week's podcast. Synchronicities and, looking back and connecting the dots. It's no accident I was working in manufacturing because I discovered Bob Chapman. I worked in manufacturing for, I suppose, 15 years as a leadership consultant and trying desperately to figure out how to make leadership concepts measurable, because that's what companies are looking for, profits. And the best way to make your business profitable is to either cut expenses or make more sales. And many times Bob Chapman himself would say, the way you do that is to cut positions, cut people. You just do. That's what you do. Jack Welch told us that's what you do. He was at GE, and you just cut the bottom 10% of the people who aren't producing, or the areas, maybe not even the people, the areas of the company that aren't producing what you need, because shareholders and stockholders are way more important than the humans you're cutting. We didn't know better. We were unconscious somehow about the way to run a business until Bob Chapman just said it doesn't have to be this way. And he's acquired companies all over the world right now, and is, not even, teaching in a way, because they have an internal process to teach leadership characteristics inside their companies. But it's not like Bob Chapman's out there beating people over the head with, you need to do it like this. Bob's just sharing what he's seeing happen within his organizations when people treat people as humans. When people say, these are human beings. This is somebody's precious son or daughter. This person in front of me who is acting crazy, who is not feeling heard or seen or gotten or appreciated, because that's how we've been conditioned to run our businesses. And so this morning's reading, I have a couple things I want to share with you from what I read this morning. Again, I'm not done with the book. I'm a little more than halfway through. But these are just 3 passages I wanted to share in the context of leadership, as opposed to how it appears to be, especially in our government right now, and how it could be in organizations like Bob Chapman is running. He says, "This, I believe, is the most noble calling of business, to transform from being a source of harm into a force for healing, from merely creating wealth to fostering human flourishing, and from extracting value to creating joy and meaning for all. When we embrace this calling, we not only uplift those we touch, but also set in motion a wave of positive change that can transform the world." Now, if you know me, you know I'm an optimist, I'm an idealist. Sometimes people will call me toxically positive. I get it. And I will stand by that 1,000,000,000%. That, what I just read to you, is what is possible and what I've always known is possible. You can go back. Anybody who's ever worked with me, has ever heard me speak, has ever been coached by me or with me, or I've been saying this forever. And finally, when Bob Chapman, who has a big platform and has the numbers behind his theory, because he can show you how profitable his company has been, but that's not his main focus. It's to make sure that people go home safe and happy and find their joy and create more opportunity in their own lives. Here's another statement from today. He says, "As we often say at Barry Waymiller, culture is who you are on your worst days. In a caring culture, everyone pulls together in times of crisis. True leadership is demonstrated in tough times." True leadership is demonstrated in tough times. We do not, by this definition, have true leadership in the tough times of our political scene right now. I'm going to stand behind that 1,000,000%. Call me what you will. Show me how I'm wrong. Show me how I'm wrong. Here's the third one I marked this morning. Empathetic listening is not just a skill, it's a profound act of care. And this is the first class people take at Barry Waymiller University inside their Truly Human Leadership program. Empathetic listening. We need to learn how to be empathetic in our listening. He saw it, he was talking about Mandela, I think. He saw it as the answer to create world peace. When people feel respected and valued, they are more open to collaboration and compromise. This truth applies universally in organizations, communities, and nations. I get really passionate about this because I've known this forever. I just haven't had the voice to say it because I couldn't find people who agreed with me. I couldn't find people who would say, let's do something about that. I crave collaboration and connection and community. And without that, early in my career, I just went along. I went along with the way most people were being. And most people were being people who would stand in the break room or at the water fountain and talk about what was wrong. And that's just what we did. And we talked about how jerky our bosses were, and we talked about how stupid this project was, and we never felt that we could say something different, because if you didn't have a solution, don't bring me the problem. So without the opportunity to work through a solution, without the opportunity to be heard and seen and gotten and appreciated and valued in the way there were others, might have come up with some solutions, we had nothing to say. I remember when I was in high school and our student manager's car broke down, and so a couple of us starters helped her with her car, and that made us late for practice. And we didn't feel that we had a good enough excuse for why we were late, so we didn't say anything. The reason we were late was valid, but we, for some reason, didn't feel like it was a good enough excuse or reason for being late, and so I think it was three or four of us starters were benched for the next game. And I remember thinking, we're not going to beat this team we're playing because three of our starters are on the bench. And there was no explanation to the people. I mean, nobody really knew why we were benched. We didn't even really know. I think we knew, deep down. We came in the fourth quarter, third or fourth quarter. We did get to play, and we ended up winning the game. But that was a lesson that I'm still talking about today, 100 years later. So if we didn't feel that we had a good enough excuse or reason, we didn't give it. We didn't say it. We didn't explain it. We didn't say we were doing a good thing. We were helping. We were late. Yes, that was before cell phones. We couldn't call. We couldn't let people know. And so we had to suffer the consequences of our inaction. And I think that has been beat into, that's a strong word, but drilled into our heads. It's been over and over and over again. That's been what we've believed. That's not a good enough excuse. I have to have a good excuse if I make a decision that goes against the way our culture is. And I don't believe it has to be that way. I believe we're at a place in American history, for sure, where we gotta decide, people. We gotta decide something. And if we keep going the way we're going, there are going to be people at the end that say, I wish I would have said something. I wish I would have done something. I wish I had the guts to follow my heart instead of everybody else's fear. I don't know what to do. I don't know the answer. I don't know. I don't have a solution, which is why I hesitate to say anything. Why would I give you a problem if I didn't have an idea for how we could solve it? So maybe the way we could solve it, or at least chip away at it, is to have more true conversations and dialogues where we agree to suspend previous assumptions in order to learn from and with each other. Think about that. If we did that in political situations, if we had legislators and representatives who actually represented those of us who had maybe a different way of seeing things, I don't know, maybe we could make a difference, but I can't even talk to my Republican friends in my own life because I'm told I'm stupid. I'm told, well, look at the other guy. Well, what about? There's no room for any kind of dialogue. I can't learn anything in that space. I want to learn. Thank you to the people who, who you are, who allow me to learn, who allow me to ask questions, who allow me to say, tell me why this is who you elected. Tell me what it was about this system that had you go that way. Tell me what it is you agree with right now. Tell me how you see things. I want to know, but I can't find people who are telling me that. I'm seeing behaviors that are just abhorrent to me, repulsive to me, and I can't, it's like I'm living in an alternative reality because I can't find people who say, yep, that's who I want to follow. Yep, that's who I want my kids to look up to. Why are we allowing this to happen? I don't understand it. Business, religious organizations, education, and government. If leadership could be some sort of universal opportunity over those four, and we could look at leadership, not management. Management is a separate thing and it's needed. But leadership, which has people learn things that Bob Chapman is teaching them, empathetic listening and treating each other as family. And what if we have no example of that in our current administration? I mean, my gosh, you guys, let's be honest about that. And if we're not being honest about that and you're going to call me names for calling that out, okay, I get it. I want to know what we can do about it. I'm not here to throw mud. And if you hear it that way, that's coming from the way you're listening. I'm concerned about what's happening in the division between families, even in my little state of North Dakota. Because not everybody believes the same way, but we don't know how to listen. We don't know how to hold space for a different way of seeing things. We get into the space of fear and constriction and, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now because that person said something I don't agree with? Or that person said something that makes some sense and I don't know how to say that I might have been wrong. Oh my gosh, why? Why can't we do that? I could be completely wrong about everything I'm feeling right now. And I welcome you telling me. And tell me with an open heart. Tell me with a way that I can join you. Because if you slap me in the face, what am I going to do? What are any of us going to do if we feel offended against? We come out swinging. We don't know how not to be defensive. We fall below the line, closed, defensive, committed to being right, even when we're not right. Or even when we could open up a dialogue instead. Above the line is open, curious, committed to learning. Committed to learning. Please help me understand why you feel the way you do. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox. Thank you. If anybody listens to this, thank you. Think about doing something in your own life, that would bring you toward what you truly do want instead of only ever going against what you don't want. Just consider that there might be something out there you personally can actually take action toward instead of away from. I would love to engage in a dialogue about that. So, as always, please look for opportunities to get real. Lynn Kaiser, hi, my friend. Good morning from Arizona. You are not in a blizzard. We are. Thank you for popping in here. And anybody else, please feel free to make comments about what you heard. Let's be respectful about differences we might have. And if you give what you most want, let's say you want to be respected, then respect somebody first. Give what you most want. And I think in that conversation, we could have a whole different perspective. And yes, Lynn, the Braver Angels is one way to think about this. If you're interested in more ways to shift the beliefs and the awarenesses in a political setting, check out Braver Angels. That is a really good resource. Thank you for mentioning that, Lynn. And as always, everybody, go find a way to get real this week. Radical, energized, authentic, and learning focused. Dig a little deeper. Stand for what you believe in. You don't have to fight against somebody else to do that. Thanks, everybody. See ya.